Donald Trump is weaponizing the Department of Justice to go after his political enemies. He's targeting public servants like New York Attorney General Letitia James and former FBI Director James Comey. But Congressman Dan Goldman is a former federal prosecutor who led the first impeachment investigation into Donald Trump. And he has seen firsthand how Trump's abuses of power undermines the rule of law. In this interview, he breaks down Trump's latest attack on voting rights, how close we are to the collapse of democratic accountability, and what Congress can still do to stop it. But first, subscribe to this channel to stay informed about how you can defend democracy. Congressman Dan Goldman, welcome back to Defending Democracy.
Thanks so much, Marc. Great to be with you again.
Well, you've become a regular here, and so I want to thank you for that. And I want to go back to something you said when we talked earlier this year that turned out to be incredibly insightful. It was at the time, people who saw my reaction could tell like a little light bulb went off. But it also turned out to be incredibly prescient. And that is, you said that one of the risks that we faced with Donald Trump's weaponization of the Department of Justice against his political opponents would be that it would create an atmosphere that you could not sort out who was actually being prosecuted on the merits and who was not being prosecuted on the merits. In other words, it undermines good prosecutors doing their job because, bad prosecutors create suspicion. And the reason why I wanted to start here, Congressman, is I have been engaged in something of a public back and forth with some others on the left who are well-meaning as well, in that I have basically said, I think the Comey prosecution is a political hit job. I think the prosecution against Tish James is a political hit job. But I'm also not willing to give the benefit of the doubt on the John Bolton prosecution. I'm not willing to give the benefit of the doubt on what we just saw in Illinois. I certainly don't give the benefit of the doubt of the prosecution of your colleague across the river in New Jersey, LaMonica MacIver. So I want to know, am I falling into the trap that you warned against, or am I reacting appropriately with skepticism now because Donald Trump and Pam Bondi are misusing the Department of Justice?
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you certainly on Comey and Tish James and LaMonica MacIver. And those are such clear political prosecutions. In other words, they would not have been brought but for the target. The Bolton case, I think, is falls into one category that I was concerned about, um, which is that on its face and seemingly from what we heard about the investigation, which started long before Donald Trump got into office, there's a colorable case there. I think they're going to have to do a lot of work to connect the dots, but if the allegations are accurate, he committed a crime. But that's one step. The next step, though, is if you were to have a prosecution of somebody that Donald Trump, I mean, LaMonica MacIver, right, is a good example. I mean,
She's
Trump,
the congressman from New Jersey that I referenced. You and I have talked about her before. She is being prosecuted for basically doing her job and doing ICE oversight.
yeah, I mean, it's a complete garbage case, but the someone like that, I'm talking more about the person than the charges. If you were to bring a seemingly legitimate investigation, but against someone like Monica MacIver, who does not have personal animosity with Donald Trump as he does with Bolton and Comey and Tish James, but is a Democrat, then of course you're going to wonder about the credibility of the prosecution. It goes one step further as well, which is everybody and anybody now. You have to wonder, is there some personal animosity? Was there a refusal to donate to his inaugural fund that pissed him off and got him to direct Pam Bondi to do an investigation into this person? And that we wouldn't know necessarily unless Trump were to say it. But it continues and it undermines the credibility of every case to some degree.
Yeah, and look, this is why your voice is so essential in Congress, because you've lived in the one world and now you are in a position to speak truth about what is going on in this administration, and you're not afraid of doing so. And let me ask that last point. You said, you know, going after someone like LaMonica MacGyver, who, as you point out, probably Donald Trump doesn't, I suspect, know personally or have personal dealings with, but who is a Democratic member of Congress who turned out to be a pain in his behind because she wanted to do ICE inspection. Well, you're a pain in the ass of Donald Trump also. Like, how much does that affect you doing your job? And I know you're going to say, because I know you and you are courageous, you are fearless, but how much do you think that is affecting the effectiveness of Democrats or other people who we need to stand up?
Yeah, look, I prosecuted mob bosses, so I've become somewhat immune to the consequences. It just is, I feel strongly that it's my job, and that I will continue to do it as vigorously as I can. And the consequences that, may come from improper um, conduct by the president or otherwise, I'll deal with, but it's not going to stop me. But I am kind of used to it from my previous profession, and a lot of my colleagues are not.
Mhm.
And even just the question makes you realize what a different time we're in. If you are an elected representative and you are voting on a bill based in any part on concern for your personal safety, concern for your family's safety, concern for your legal safety, then our democracy is undermined, plain and simple. I actually think it's a bigger problem on the Republican
Yeah.
side than I do on the Democratic side. Because while I do think my Democratic colleagues think about it, I think we've seen specific instances where Republicans have changed their mind because of threats that are not just political threats like a primary, but are actual personal or security threats. And there's been some discussion of it from Republican senators in particular. Lisa Murkowski
Yep.
talked about it. Tom Tillis has talked about it, and he seemingly switched his vote on Kash Patel, Joni Ernst,
Yep. That's right.
who was the deciding vote on Pete Hegseth, and has spent her career fighting sexual assault in the military, and then got so much pressure that she decided that she was going to support for confirmation as the top dog in the Defense Department, someone who had been credibly accused of sexual assault. So I think that it is an issue, and it's a much bigger problem if it is an issue than people realize.
Yeah. No. And I want to focus on the Republicans now, because I had on Congressman Eric Swalwell from California, and he
I'm sorry
said,
you had to deal with that, by the way.
he's a great guy. One of the points that he made was that on the Epstein files, that there is an enormous amount of pressure being put on these handful of Republicans to switch their position on the discharge petition. Right, the reason why the Democrat elect from Arizona is not being sworn in, why the House is not in session, is because the Speaker is afraid that a discharge petition will succeed and that the House will have to vote on releasing the Epstein files. And he made sort of 2 points about this. The first is that there's a lot of pressure being placed on the Republicans who have provided the votes along with every Democrat to release the Epstein files. But more interesting to me that I want your reaction to is he said that he thinks that if there was a vote, Republicans would then vote not in mass, but like in large numbers to actually release the Epstein files, which tells me that there is a large number of Republicans right now, your colleagues, who actually do believe the Epstein files should be released, but are frankly afraid of Donald Trump or Mike Johnson. You tell me, of someone or their supporters to actually do the thing that they want to do.
100%. Eric is absolutely right. There's a tremendous amount of pressure on the four who have signed it. There's a tremendous amount of pressure on the others who were really pushing it. I mean, Anna Paulina Luna was leading the charge to release the Epstein files, to release the JFK files, to release everything. This was her cause célèbre. And once she seemingly got some pressure from the White House, she backed off completely. And now she has not signed the discharge petition. And I don't think there's any question that the reason why they're delaying as much as possible is they're hoping to peel off one of the four of them, to come off of the discharge petition. But if you look at the co-sponsors of the bill, there are tons of Republican
Hmm.
co-sponsors. So they have taken the position already that the Epstein files should be released. They took that position before it became apparent that Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. And so Donald Trump did the 180, Pam Bondi did the 180, Kash Patel did the 180, um, in the middle of the whole production effort where they were getting ready to turn them over because they had promised to. And so they are in a pickle. And a big part of the reason why Mike Johnson is just shutting down the House, as he did in July and as he's doing now, is that the Rules Committee, which has to vote on every rule that ultimately determines the amendments and how much time you debate a bill that goes to the floor, um, the Democrats kept putting in the Epstein files as an amendment to the rule. And for a little while, they had to vote it down. And they finally just got so tired of actually having to vote it down when they supported the release of it, that they told, my understanding is they told the speaker, don't bring it in front of us anymore. And so rather than have the Rules Committee just vote down the release of the Epstein files, the speaker is just canceling Congress. And because he is just doing the bidding of Donald Trump, who initially wanted them to be released. I don't quite know why. I mean, even when you go and you look back at his statements, he does always add the word credible evidence, which is a euphemism that they're using right now for just evidence that they like is credible evidence. Evidence that they don't like is not credible evidence. They did the same thing in the Tom Homan case.
That's right.
Um, I don't know how $50,000 in a cash bag is not credible evidence that you would want to continue I mean, in a bag of cash that you would want to continue the investigation, but that's their little wiggle room. And even Trump, because it was clear now in retrospect, Trump knew he was in it. And so that's where we are right now. It's a massive cover up.
And so, how does this play this out for me? How does this end? Right? We have the House basically closed because Mike Johnson is afraid to bring the members back. You have the government closed because the House Republicans, among other reasons, the House Republicans won't come back to Washington, D.C., right? You can't reopen the government if there's not discussion between Democrats and Republicans. And with the House Republicans, out of town, that makes that harder. There are obviously other challenges in the Senate and healthcare and other things that are that are going on here. But like, tell me how does this all resolve? I mean, at some point, Mike Johnson's going to have to bring Republicans back, right? And this is going to not have gone away. I'll be right back with more of my conversation with Congressman Dan Goldman in a moment. But I started Democracy Docket in 2020 to be the leading source of news, information, and analysis on the threats to voting and democracy in court. And right now, we are at a tipping point. But the Democracy Docket team is growing to meet the moment. That's why we need your help to hold Donald Trump and Republicans accountable. For just $10 a month, you'll get access to exclusive events, insights from me, and much, much more. Become a premium member now by clicking on the link in the description below.
Well, they're hoping it goes away because they're hoping one of the four comes off of
Ah,
the discharge
oh,
petition. And so that Adelita Grijalva, when she is sworn in and signs the discharge petition, will no longer be the 218th and final vote that is necessary for the discharge petition to just go directly to the House floor for a vote. But even if it passes, it's now got to go over to the Senate. And it's possible that John Thune decides he's not bringing it to the Senate floor. Then, even if he were to bring it, the president has to sign it for a bill. Now, the Republicans could easily just subpoena all of the Epstein files.
oh, so
They
they don't even need this bill.
No, this bill is to force leadership of the House Republican Conference to uh, well, it's to force the release of it because leadership won't.
So you're saying if Mike Johnson really wanted the Epstein files released, if Republicans in the House really wanted it released, they could just issue a subpoena and get the files?
Yes. And now what they have done is really sort of next level cover up. They passed a resolution that authorized the Epstein investigation in the Oversight Committee. That resolution, however, itemizes several categories of information
Right.
that need to be turned over, but it does not include witness interviews. It does not include any videos or audio recordings. It does not include photographs. It does not include the case initiation documents. How did this case originate in 2004, right around the time that Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein had a falling out? And so what they're trying to say is, oh, we've got an investigation already. We're trying to get all their Epstein files, but they have intentionally left out all of the critical evidence where someone like Donald Trump would be most likely to be found. And so they're Johnson's trying to use a sleight of hand to say, oh, no, we are doing this investigation. But the reason why the discharge petition is still important is because it does include all of those categories of evidence, which would not only disclose if Donald Trump is in it, but a lot of the other accomplices of Jeffrey Epstein would be most likely in those categories of evidence.
All right. I want to go back to where we started and the criminal prosecutions. So let's just talk about the Tish James and James Comey investigations, because I think those are the ones that everyone sort of most naturally understand are, an abuse of the grand jury process, and that for which there's a lack of evidence. My worry is that Donald Trump is actually okay with a dismissal if he can say it was a technicality. So, in other words, if it gets dismissed on vindictive prosecution or selective prosecution, or even that Lindsay Halligan, the former personal lawyer, I guess, or another lawyer for Donald Trump. So, we have these two cases that have a lot of procedural irregularities. And do you worry that Donald Trump is like, fine, dismiss them on the procedural things? Because then I can just say it was a liberal Obama or Biden judge, I can't remember which, that, dismissed on a technicality. Or is your view like like a win for justice is a win for justice, and that it doesn't matter because Donald Trump will lie no matter what?
Yeah, I think there are two ways of looking at it. And I think you make a very good point. And reminds me of the first Ukraine impeachment that I worked on, where it was very clear that Donald Trump didn't care if President Zelensky actually conducted an investigation into Joe Biden. All he wanted was for him to announce an
Right.
investigation because that would give him the hook to start using that on the campaign. And so to some extent, you are correct. If it's not resolved on the merits, then Trump will say it's a technicality. Exactly right. That for his own purposes and his own political purposes, he can, at a minimum, save face and perhaps use it. But I think overall, for our justice system, it still is very important. And to allow for a precedent where the president of the United States so clearly directs a prosecution that would not have otherwise been brought because of his animosity for his political adversaries or adversaries in general, is such a corrupting and corrosive act that it needs to be nipped in the bud as quickly as possible. And if there is such a thing as vindictive or selective prosecution, I cannot think of a fact pattern more that's stronger than this one. And part of it is because Donald Trump literally published a tweet directing the
By
attorney.
accident. By accident. By the way, it was intended to be a direct message to Pam Bondi that apparently became a public
And by
post.
the way, that's even scarier because how many others has he actually written to her that weren't accidentally published? And how much direction is he giving to her directly from the president to the attorney general on individual criminal cases, which, is why Senator Blumenthal and I are working on a bill that should be coming out relatively soon, that would prevent that kind of communication and direction. But it is really important that the judiciary kibosh this kind of abuse right away without letting it fester or even letting it go forward.
All right. I want to turn to one of the big topics right now in the country, which is redistricting. And I want to start by saying to everybody that if you want to know who the real good guys are, look at Dan Goldman. Okay. There's a lawsuit in New York my law firm is involved in that would potentially, if successful, change the map. And rather than come out and do what so many incumbents do, which is say, don't move a single voter from my district, the congressman basically said, I will do what needs to be done to represent constituents that I represent and also, obviously comply with the law. So, with that background, I just want to ask you a broad question. I'm happy we can get into New York, but I want to ask you a broader question, which is that one of the problems I think we're having as Democrats is that there are too few incumbents, frankly, that are like you. That for a lot of incumbents, or for that matter, state legislators who have aspirations on seats, they are more interested in their own electoral prospects than the good of democracy. What do we do about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think that we are seeing this time around a lot more selflessness than we have seen in the past, where I think every Democrat realizes that Trump is trying to use mid-decade redistricting based purely on partisan gerrymandering to essentially rig the election in favor of the Republicans, and that even though Democrats almost uniformly oppose partisan gerrymandering, the only way that we are going to get rid of it is to win elections and win the majority so that we can pass a bill. And so we have to fight fire with fire. We cannot fight with one hand behind our back. And so I think for the most part around the country, save a couple exceptions, you're seeing in California, an example of
California,
everybody.
Virginia.
Yep, Virginia, right? Everybody is like, hey, we got to do whatever we can do, even if that means I go from a safe seat to a much tougher seat and that I may end up risking a loss. We need to be all hands on deck here and do everything we can. And I think that's also just a reflection of the existential period that we're in for our democracy, is that Donald Trump knows he can't carry the Republicans to a majority if there's a free and fair election next November. So he is trying to do partisan gerrymandering in the middle of a decade, which has never been done before. He is trying to undermine the security of the upcoming election. I have no doubt about it. He has put in election deniers in the government who oversee the election. There's going to have to be a massive effort on the other side to prevent that from happening, or at least to minimize that. And because he knows that his ideas and his performance and the actions that he's taken are political losers. It's no different than what he's doing with law firms and media companies and universities. Rather than actually debate the merits of whatever the issue is, debate the issues, he tries to undermine the process so that you can't even get to the debate of the issues, because he will always lose that debate, because he only cares about himself and those who are close to him. And ultimately, that's not a way you can win elections when there are free and fair elections. And so this is, the redistricting is something we have to do to neutralize their efforts to essentially steal the election. And I do see a lot of my colleagues who are much more open to doing this than perhaps in the past.
Let me just speak to the audience. He's very polite, but honestly, he is an example of what we need. And a lot of his colleagues are not nearly as open as he is being. He is being a very nice guy about this, but I can list a whole bunch of states. I mean, we could start with Oregon, Colorado, Washington. I mean, don't get me started with the places that are not Illinois, where the state house leadership won't doesn't want to change the map. So you are a very kind person, but everybody watching this, if you want to support a Democrat who is really not just talking the talk but doing the right thing, go support Dan Goldman and his campaign and his PAC and whatever else, because he is actually doing the thing rather than just saying words. But anyway, let me ask you about um, what you see as the threats that we are not paying attention to. In other words, at some point, the government is going to reopen. There's obviously a healthcare threat that is looming that is not going to get solved. There are foreign international threats, with government power. Donald Trump continues to seem to be targeting parts of the federal government. He is escalating his attacks on democracy, in election rules. What do you see as you look out as the things that we are not necessarily focused on right now, but that we need to be?
So I divide Trump's sort of abuses of power into two different categories. One is more policy based, and that is a result of consequences of elections. So he is cruel, and that's almost part of the whole goal here. But he has taken away health care from tens of millions. He is trying to take away food assistance for the most vulnerable, not only next year from this big bill, but literally tomorrow, Saturday, he has the funding in an emergency reserve fund in the USDA that would pay out food assistance, food stamps for November, for most of November. And he is refusing to use that as leverage that he's trying to use to force Democrats to vote to reopen the government so that people can eat. That is literally where he is. Now, a lot of that is these are policies, and policy disagreements are common, and they can be undone when you win elections. What I focus a lot more on is the structural and
Yes.
institutional attacks.
Yep.
And we talked about the DOJ. I mean, that's not something that can just flip back in a new administration. I am particularly in this moment really, really worried about immigration enforcement,
Huh.
about the what I see as the very clear plan that Donald Trump has, which is to continue to send militarized ICE officers or DHS officers into cities with excessive force, really trying to incite violence. Then he will use the fact that there is violence as a pretext to send in the military. And then once the military goes in, he will use that as a pretext to aggregate more power and ultimately to what I think is his goal, which is to say, for one reason or another, Insurrection Act or martial law or something, that there can't be a 2028 election because of what's going on in our country, kind of a thing that he has essentially that he has fully created, did not exist. And so right now, that's the trajectory I see us going on, which is truly scary and is uh, that combined with the corruption in the DOJ is the most authoritarian actions and strategy that he seems to have, and that I find to be the scariest.
Yeah. Look, you and I agree on a lot. I would say that the fact that he keeps posting on social media that he wants to do away with mail-in voting, he wants to do away with certain voting equipment, he wants to do away most recently with early voting. This didn't get nearly as much attention in the press, but he posted on social media he wants to do it with early voting. So he is constricting the ability for people to vote. At the same time, he is sending federal monitors into off-year elections. These are not federal elections; these are state elections, and he's doing it at the request of the Republican Party. And then, as you say, you have DHS and ICE being more and more aggressive, and the military coming in. Each of these things, in my view, is an effort to normalize towards, as you say, the eventual goals. Right? That you send some monitors in these sort of off-year elections, and not a lot of people pay attention. But then it's like more normalized when 2026 comes around. Then it's even more normalized when 2028 comes around. You start with some military in LA and Washington, D.C., and then it kind of like leaves the headlines. I mean, you work in Washington, D.C.,
Yeah.
and they're still there. Like,
There's
like they haven't left, right? So like it just becomes part of the daily fabric in more and more places to see this. And then this all ladders up to the midterms. And then, as you say, it ladders up beyond there. So if Democrats, I keep saying that the single most important thing right now that we can do to combat Republican um, attacks on elections, and the single most important thing we can do to fight Donald Trump's authoritarianism, is to elect Democrats to the U.S. Congress. Like this gets me sometimes in crosswise with some of the folks in the activist community. Like I have zero tolerance for picking fights with Democrats in Congress. Like Democrats in Congress are the solution. They are the answer to the problem. And anyone who spends any amount of time attacking them is literally doing Donald Trump's bidding. So in my view, you don't have to agree or disagree. In my view, what we have to do is elect Democrats to the US Congress. So whether you agree with my priority, but that is my priority, and I've stated it over and over again, so I don't care. Um, Tell people, though, what a Democratic Congress would be able to do that would help prevent these things. Because I mean, I could list them till my heart is content, but maybe if you say it, since you'd be one of the guys with the gavel, how different this world would look, and how much more of a short leash Donald Trump would be on.
Yeah, and a very different, and that's why he's trying so desperately to hold on to the Republican majority, because the degree of accountability that is coming his way is going to be overwhelming. And that'll be from investigations with subpoena power. And even though he will defy subpoenas, there are ways around that we will continue to push and as aggressively as possible. He will not be able to push this um, crazy extremist legislation through, of course. We won't necessarily get to push what we want through, but it will require bipartisanship to do anything. But I think the one thing, and you would appreciate this perhaps more than most, that we will be able to do in the majority is that we will be able to file lawsuits on behalf of the
Right.
House of
That's right.
Representatives. And right now, we cannot do that because the House operates by majority only. So if we wanted to file a lawsuit against rescission or impoundment or any violation of our spending powers, our power of the purse, we can't do it because the Republicans control whether or not we go to court. And it's been incredibly frustrating that we're unable to do it. And but you've seen state attorneys general step up. You've seen lots of other law firms and nonprofit organizations, community based organizations that are trying to step up and fill that void. But from a harm standpoint, we obviously would have the best case because it's money that we
Absolutely.
appropriated and that they are now not spending as we did it. And we can't do that. So that's something else that I think will be very, very helpful. It's not going to be a silver bullet. Donald Trump's still going to be president. The Senate is still going to be Republican. He is still going to try to break the law. He still has a tremendous amount of power in his foreign powers authority. But as an example, there's the International Emergencies Act. May not be the right name, but whatever the powers were that he used to install the tariffs. actually by statute are required to come before Congress for a ratifying
Huh,
vote
did not
within
know that.
15 business days or session days. So, as an example, that would have happened if we were in the majority. And I think it would be very hard for many Republicans to vote against the or for the tariffs in based on the very, very far-fetched rationale that he used for the emergency. But the Republicans killed it. And even though it's required to come to the floor, it's required to do so after 15 days. And they literally put a clause in one of the rule motions that they passed, one of the rule resolutions, that stopped the clock on that specific bill
Hmm.
that Ranking Member Greg Meeks of the Foreign Affairs Committee had introduced that would have come to the floor, but they literally just stopped the clock so that it wouldn't get to 15 days, so that it wouldn't have to.
As if 15 days hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the type of thing that they've been able to do to cover for Donald Trump that will not happen next time around. And so his abuse of power will be limited to some extent. But because Congress and the Republicans have just completely abdicated their role, but it's not going to be a silver bullet. We're not going to pass all sorts of legislation undoing a lot of the policy and legislation that he's done, but we will be able to put serious guardrails around the gross abuse of power.
Okay, so I want to say that I think that it actually might even be better than the congressman just said. And I hang around more of my time watching Senate procedure than I do House procedure. People who know me know that. Um, if the Epstein bill came out of the House, it would be a jailbreak in the U.S. Senate. I mean, there is no way Republicans in the Senate are going to, if a bunch of Freedom Caucusers vote to release the Epstein files, there's no way that they would not feel compelled to bring this to a vote, force them to bring this to a vote. Actually, Democrats would be able to get it to the floor anyway, and that it would pass. And I think the same is true on tariffs, by the way. Like if the House Democrats could push a bill out of the House into the Senate on tariffs, it would pass the Senate. It would get 60 votes in the Senate. Like this is the thing. Like the House does so much of the bidding to keep stuff and I'll give you another one that will surprise you. I actually think your legislative efforts on grand jury reform, if Democrats could get a reasonable grand jury reform bill out of the House that has the support of people like you or former federal prosecutors, and it got to the Senate, I could list to you right now for Republican senators who would vote for it. Like it would, what I mean? Like it's not, the thing that people don't sometimes understand about Washington D.C. is that not having to take the vote is oftentimes the key, and a Democratic control of the House will force Republicans to take a lot more votes, not only in the House but also in the Senate.
Right. You raise a very good point, and being in the House, I am much more a student of House procedure than I am of Senate procedure. But it is true that leadership in the House controls the floor, and it doesn't even often matter what the majority of their caucus might think. They will just say no. But in the Senate, there are mechanisms, right, for the minority to get bills on the floor much easier than a discharge petition, which is really the only way that the minority can in the House. And so you raise a very good point. And I guess the question just becomes, I agree. I mean, certainly the Epstein files would pass the House.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that the challenge with all of these things, and this is kind of the last set of topics I want to talk to you about, is what do you do, whether Democrats retake control of Congress or don't take control of Congress? What do you do today? What do you do tomorrow? What do we all do with the fact that the position of the executive branch of the Department of Justice seems to be that Donald Trump actually doesn't have to follow any requests or requirements of federal law. So he just kind of operates a lawless presidency. And, like, what's your advice? Like, we see governors suing, we see AGs suing, we see private parties suing. I agree with you. Congress could sue. But like, how does this like play out? How does it play out that Pam Bondi's position seems to be that the law never applies to the president?
And certainly that's the president's view. And this is unprecedented, right? This has never happened before. You've never had, even in Trump's first term, um, where there was some lip service at least to following the law for a while. Um, toward the end of that 2019 2020 period, they just started rejecting all subpoenas. But we can subpoena other, other entities, third parties, and we can get a lot of the information. We can subpoena we did in the impeachment was actually to subpoena middle level folks, not the top political appointees, but the mid level folks who do have a real patriotism and a obligation to our country and who do value the subpoena, a congressional subpoena. So there are ways around the absolute opposition that we are unquestionably going to get. But it's going to be a new frontier to see how far they are willing to go, and to see, frankly, whether the Republicans, presumably after having lost an election, are as sycophantish to Donald Trump as they are right now.
So let me conclude with this. You know, I don't know how much time you've spent with Donald Trump. Uh, Probably not a lot. But you probably know as much about Donald Trump as anyone because you were the lead impeachment um, uh, uh, prosecutor or investigator, or whatever the right terminology is, when during his first term. So I suspect you know him in a way, his way of thinking, his way of operating, and you've seen him in his second term with for example, the message that he sent to Pam Bondi that he accidentally put publicly. Um, what do you like? Is this someone who has a deliberate plan? Like you laid out something that resonates with me. Like this is his plan to lead up to 2026 and 2028. And it assumes, therefore, there is actually a plan. Other people suggest that he just kind of like wings it as he goes along. So, what is your insight into his method of authoritarianism? Like, is this thought through? Is this just spur of the moment? Is it clever? Is it clumsy? Like, how do you describe his psychology around authoritarianism?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the big difference between the first term and the second term. First of all, he understands the job. He did not understand the job when he first got into it in 2017. It took him a long time to get acclimated, and part of what he decided to do at that time was to put respectable Republicans in critical positions, who ultimately interfered with his true authoritarian instincts. This time around, of course, he has not done that. He has put lackeys in very intentionally. But they've also spent 4 years focused solely on planning for a second Trump term. And so, what I do think you get is a combination of a well considered strategy that has been developed by others over the 4 years preceding his inauguration, combined with a sort of evil genius and antenna that Donald Trump has as to what can what can be effective in moving that strategy forward. And so I don't think it's Donald Trump's strategy, but I do think it is largely Donald Trump's execution of the strategy, which really only he can do, that makes it effective. And part of the reason why the execution he is needed for the execution is that he has such immense power over all of the Republicans and his own cabinet officials. And so when he directs Pam Bondi to charge Jim Comey and Tish James, even though the US attorney and the career prosecutors who had investigated those cases said there was insufficient evidence to move forward, they figure out a way to do it. And they'll do anything in order to do it. And so they have the right vessel in Donald Trump to push the envelope farther than anyone would ever consider pushing the envelope. And I think he has also we've also started to see some repetitive motive MOs, motive operandi, which is that he plants a seed about something, claims it's kind of a joke or laughs about it. Then he has all of his sycophants kind of coming out and trying to be the first one to support him. Then it normalizes, and then we just accept it. I mean, the best example of that is self-pardoning. In
Mhm.
2018, when he said he could pardon himself, but he doesn't plan on it, everyone was up in arms. By the time we got to November 2024, everyone just assumed that he was either going to pardon himself or dismiss the cases or whatever it is, because he had normalized it to such a degree. Now, the Supreme Court helped, of course, but it's that kind of tactic and strategy that he uses very effectively. And it's part of the reason why we need to get out in front of where he's going, because the best way to stop him is to prevent him from setting the narrative. So if we are setting the narrative that he's coming into New York City with these immigration agents solely to incite violence and to act with excessive force so that he could bring in the military, when he actually does that, it's a lot harder for him to argue, oh no, this is really important. We have to do it because he has followed the playbook that we have anticipated. And so I spent a lot of time, as you point out, using the immense knowledge I have from having studied him for a long
My
time.
apologies to you for that.
Yes, I don't wish it on anybody, but trying to anticipate where he's going so we can get out in front of it.